The year is 2004. The room smells of old paper and sterilized soil. Dr. Eris Thorne adjusts her glasses. She's a plant geneticist at the State University, young, brilliant, impatient with history. She is reviewing a decades-old file, a retrospective analysis of the Great Blight of '88, an event that broke 1,000 farms. A fungal infection that laughed at modern chemistry. It had wiped out nearly 70% of the state's corn crop, a catastrophe. Her screen is filled with data points, yields, loss percentages, fungicide application rates, names of hybrid seeds. Silver Spire 720, Golden Harvest 914, Agrogen X 12. All of them failed, catastrophically. She scrolls down, then she stops. Her finger hovers over the mouse. There is an anomaly in the data, a single entry from a small county extension report, a farm that reported a 94% survival rate. Not a typo. She checks the source document, a handwritten note from the county agent. Farmer Arthur Hayes. Variety: Hayes Red Dent. Classification: Heirloom. Obsolete. Dr. Thorne leans back. She calls her department head, an older man named Frank Miller, a man who had been a seed rep in the 70s and 80s. She says the name, Arthur Hayes. On the other end of the line, there is a long silence, a silence so deep it feels like a weight. Frank Miller closes his eyes. He remembers a conversation on a dusty farm lane, almost 30 years ago. He remembers looking a young farmer in the eye, a farmer with one good arm, and telling him, with all the certainty of a man who knows he is right, that his grandfather's seeds were dead weight. He told him to let the past die. He told him he was protecting him from failure. This channel is for stories like that, the stories about the quiet ones, the ones who were counted out, the ones who were told they were wrong by people who sounded so sure, so reasonable. If you believe these stories need to be told, subscribe to this channel, because what happened on that farm, after that conversation, it's a story about more than just corn. It's a story about what we choose to remember and what we are told to forget. Let's go back to the spring of 1977. Arthur Hayes stood in the yard of his family's farm. The farm wasn't much, 160 acres, good soil, but tired. The house needed paint. The barn needed a new roof. Arthur was 26 years old. He had his father's eyes and his grandfather's stubbornness. He also had one arm. His left sleeve was pinned neatly at the elbow. A farming accident when he was 16, a mistake with a post-hole auger, a moment that changed the shape of his life. His father, Thomas, had died the winter before, a heart that just gave out, worn down by lean years and quiet worry. The farm was Arthur's now. The debt was his now. The future was his, and it looked short. A new car pulled up the lane, a shiny Ford sedan, too clean for a dirt road. A young man got out. He wore a crisp shirt and a tie. His name was Frank Miller. He was with Agrogen, the biggest seed company in the state. Frank was sharp. He was friendly. He believed in the product he was selling. He believed in progress. He walked with the easy confidence of a man who holds the future in his briefcase. Frank shook Arthur's hand, his one good hand. He didn't linger on the pinned sleeve. He was professional. He was kind. This is important to remember. Frank Miller was a kind man. He coached Little League. He served on the church council. He genuinely wanted to help the farmers on his route. He saw himself as a partner in their success. He laid out his brochures on the hood of his car, glossy pictures of perfect corn, ears dripping with golden kernels, Silver Spire 720, the miracle hybrid, drought-resistant, high yield, engineered for modern fertilizers and pesticides, the future of farming. Frank spoke with passion. His words were smooth and certain. This seed will change your life, Arthur. We're seeing yields of 180 bushels to the acre. You're probably getting, what, 90? 100 on a good year? Arthur nodded. He didn't say much. Frank continued. The math is simple. Double the yield, you double your profit. You can pay off your father's notes. You can fix that barn. You can finally get ahead. Arthur listened. He looked at the glossy pictures. Then he looked at his own barn, the one with the faded red paint. Inside that barn were 50 canvas sacks, each one filled with seed corn, dark red kernels, haze red dent. The seed his grandfather Silas had developed, right here on this land. Silas had spent 50 years selecting the best ears, saving the seed from the strongest stalks, the ones that survived the dry years, the ones that resisted the rusts and the smuts. It wasn't a miracle seed, it was just a patient seed, a seed that remembered 100 seasons in its bones. Arthur said, "I've got my own seed." Frank smiled, a patient, understanding smile. The smile of a teacher correcting a bright but misguided student. "I know. I've heard about your family's corn. It's a fine story, Arthur. A real piece of local history. But history doesn't pay the bills. That seed is tired. Its genetics are played out. It can't compete. It's dead weight." The words hung in the air. Dead weight. Not mean, not cruel, just a statement of fact, a diagnosis. Arthur felt something tighten in his chest. Not anger, not contempt. Something softer and, in some ways, worse. It was the feeling of being erased. Gently, kindly, for his own good. Frank opened his briefcase. "Here's the deal. We'll set you up with enough Silver Spire 720 for your whole 160 acres. We'll extend you the credit. And we'll get you on the AgriGen fertilizer program, our 20-20-20 blend, specially formulated for this hybrid. The two work together. The seed needs the fertilizer. The fertilizer unlocks the seed's potential. It's a system, a complete solution." Arthur looked at the order form. The numbers were big. The cost of the seed, the cost of the fertilizer, the cost of the specific herbicide you had to use with it. It was more debt than he'd ever seen. He said, "I was thinking of planting half your seed, half mine. See how it does." Frank's smile faded a little. He looked concerned, genuinely concerned. "Arthur, I can't recommend that. You won't get the full benefit. And frankly, our financing is for the whole system. It's a package deal. We need to ensure optimum performance. We can't have our seed being compared to..." He paused. He didn't want to say it again. "To an uncontrolled variable." "Besides," he said, leaning in a little, "I'm not going to be the man who sells you half a solution and watches you fail. I want to see you succeed. Your father was a good man. He worked hard. He just never had the right tools. I'm giving you the right tools." There it was, the kindest dismissal of all. The gentle implication that his father and his grandfather were good men who just weren't smart enough, weren't modern enough, that their life's work was a quaint mistake. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, but by a friend, by someone who genuinely believed they were protecting you, by someone who had your best interests at heart. It's the hardest argument to fight. Because it's not an attack, it's a shield. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt that. Because what Arthur did next, he did alone. Arthur walked Frank Miller back to his car. He said, "I appreciate you stopping by, Frank. I need to think on it." Frank nodded, disappointed but still friendly. "The offer stands, Arthur. Don't wait too long. Planting season is right around the corner." He got in his clean car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust that settled on everything. Arthur went back into the house. The kitchen was quiet. The old clock on the wall ticked, each tick marking a second of a life he now had to build. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table his grandfather had built from an old oak tree. He pulled a box from the shelf. Inside it was a leather-bound journal, Silas Hayes's Seed Journal. The pages were filled with his grandfather's elegant, looping script, entries dating back to 1922. He wrote about the weather, the soil, the way the rain fell. He drew pictures of corn stalks, diagrams of root systems, notes on which plants he selected for seed. Not just the biggest ears. He selected for the thickest stalks, the deepest roots, the darkest leaves. He was selecting for resilience, not just yield. Arthur turned the pages. He found an entry from 1934, the middle of the Dust Bowl. The entry read, "Drought came again, hard this year. Neighbor's corn is all burned up. Mine is hurting. But the ones from row 12, their leaves are still green. Their roots must have found something deep. I will save every seed from that row." The dirt knows. The seed remembers. Don't let them forget. Arthur ran his thumb over the faded ink. The dirt knows. The seed remembers. It wasn't a slogan. It was a philosophy, a belief that the land itself held a kind of wisdom, a wisdom that couldn't be cooked up in a laboratory. He flipped to the last entry, from 1971, just before Silas died. His handwriting was shaky. "They have new seeds now. They call them hybrids. They promise the world. Maybe they're right, but they need chemicals to live. They need the company's poison to fight the bugs. They need the company's food to grow. They are born orphans. Our seed was raised here. It knows this dirt. It knows this wind. It knows this sun. It is not an orphan. It belongs here." Arthur closed the journal. The decision was made. Not with anger, but with a quiet sense of duty. He would not let his grandfather's work be called dead weight. He would not let his seed become an orphan. He would plant the Hayes Red Dent, all 160 acres of it. And he would do it his way, without the new seed, without the new fertilizer, without the new debt. He was on his own, and for the first time since his father died, he felt a strange sense of peace. The quiet decision was made, but the work was just beginning, because this is where the story becomes bigger than one man. This is where it becomes a lesson. The first problem was the planter, his father's old John Deere 494. It was designed for modern uniform seeds. The Hayes Red Dent kernels were irregular, big, small, fat, thin. They jammed the planter plates. He couldn't get a consistent drop. He'd spend more time clearing jams than planting. He went into town to the John Deere dealership, the same dealership Frank Miller probably visited every week. He asked the parts manager if they had plates for heirloom corn. The manager, a man named Henderson, just laughed. "Son, they haven't made those in 30 years. Nobody plants that stuff anymore. Just upgrade your planter. Buy a new one, on credit, of course." Arthur left. He drove to a small, greasy workshop on the edge of town. The sign said, "Gus's Repair." Gus was 70 years old. He had grease under his fingernails that was older than Arthur. He had known Arthur's grandfather. Arthur explained the problem. Gus chewed on a toothpick and looked at the planter plate Arthur brought him. He grunted. "Yeah, they want you on the treadmill. New seed needs a new planter. New planter needs a new tractor to pull it. New tractor needs a new loan. Pretty soon, the bank owns you. And the seed company owns the bank." Gus spat the toothpick out. He looked at Arthur. "Your granddad, Silas, he ever tell you about the time he fixed my daddy's combine with a piece of a tin roof and some baling wire?" Arthur shook his head. "Well, he did. Saved our harvest. Never took a dime for it. Said that's what neighbors do." Gus picked up the planter plate. "Leave this with me. And bring the whole damn planter over tomorrow. We'll make it work." For the next week, Arthur and Gus worked in that dusty shop. Gus was a mechanical genius. He didn't have schematics. He had intuition. He took apart the seed mechanism. He measured the heirloom kernels. He cut new plates from sheets of steel. He welded. He ground. He cursed. He drank coffee that was thick as tar. He taught Arthur how to use a lathe, how to read the metal, how to feel for the right tolerance with his fingertips. With his one good hand, Arthur learned. He was patient. He was precise. By the end of the week, they had a custom-made set of planter plates, perfectly calibrated for the haze red dent. Gus wiped his hands on a rag. "There, that ought to do it." Arthur asked him what he owed. Gus just shook his head. "Your granddad paid this bill 40 years ago. Just get that corn in the ground and prove all those bastards in their shiny cars wrong." Arthur did. He planted all 160 acres. The old John Deere 494, modified by an old man's memory and a young man's will, worked perfectly. The seed went into the ground, cleanly, evenly. He didn't use the Agrigen 20-20-20 fertilizer. He couldn't afford it anyway. Instead, he did what his grandfather's journal described. He spread the manure from his father's small herd of cattle. He had planted a cover crop of clover the fall before, and now he plowed it under. Green manure, the old way, the slow way. His neighbors watched him. They were all planting Silver Spire 720. Their brand new air-conditioned tractors moved much faster than his old John Deere. They finished planting in half the time. At the local co-op, the talk was all about Arthur Hayes. "He's farming like it's 1930, Tom Henderson said. "He's going to lose the farm. His pride is going to be the end of him." Another farmer, a man named Dave Peterson, chimed in. "Frank Miller from Agrigen stopped by my place, said he tried to help Arthur, offered him a great deal. The kid just wouldn't listen, too stubborn, stuck in the past. It's a shame. His father was a good man." The community was split. Most saw him as a fool, a boy playing with his grandfather's relics. A few older farmers watched with quiet interest. They remembered Silas. They remembered what his corn could do. But they didn't say much. They didn't want to get on the wrong side of Agrigen, or the bank. That summer was hot and dry. The Silver Spire 720, pumped full of chemical fertilizer, grew fast. The stalks were tall and uniform, perfect rows of green soldiers. Arthur's corn grew slower. The stalks were uneven heights. Some were thick, some were thinner. From the road, his fields looked messy, wild. Frank Miller drove by one afternoon in July. He slowed his car. He looked at the neat, orderly fields of his customers. Then he looked at Arthur's field. He shook his head with a small, sad sigh. He felt a pang of pity. He had tried to help the boy. He truly had. He was certain he was watching a failure in slow motion. What he couldn't see was what was happening underground. The roots of the Silver Spire 720 were shallow. They were bred to feed on the fertilizer in the topsoil. The roots of the Hayes Red Dent were deep. They were searching, drilling down into the subsoil, looking for the deep moisture. The moisture the clover had helped hold, the moisture the manure had nourished. They were finding something to drink. When harvest came, the neighbors' yields were huge. 170, 180 bushels an acre. They celebrated at the co-op. They slapped each other on the back. Frank Miller was a hero. Arthur's yield was 110 bushels an acre. The doubters nodded knowingly. See? Told you so. But here's the thing they didn't talk about: the contrast math. The neighbors' input costs were massive: the seed, the fertilizer, the herbicide, the pesticide, the loan payments on the new equipment. After all that, their net profit was about $90 an acre. Arthur's input costs were almost zero. He had his own seed. He had his own fertilizer. He owned his equipment outright. His net profit was $100 an acre. He made more money by growing less. He didn't have a big check, but he didn't have a big bill either. He took his profit, and he paid down a piece of his father's debt. He bought a new blade for his scraper, and he put a new tin roof on the barn. He did it with cash. Let me tell you about the next 10 years, because this is where the story builds its rhythm. This is the long game. Proving people wrong takes decades, not moments. 1978. Arthur harvested 115 bushels an acre. His neighbors got 185. They bought new pickup trucks. Arthur made $110 an acre profit. He paid down more of the debt. Cash. 1979. A wet spring. Some root rot in the low-lying fields. The Silver Spire 720, with its shallow roots, was hit hard. The neighbors' yields dropped to 150. Arthur's corn, with its deep, robust root system, was fine. He got 120 bushels. His profit was $115 an acre. He paid off the last of his father's farm loan. The bank sent him the deed in the mail. He held it in his one good hand. It was the first time in 50 years the Hayes farm was free and clear. He bought a used combine, an old Alice Chalmers, paid for it with cash. 1980, a good year for everyone. He harvested 125 bushels. Frank Miller was promoted to regional manager at Agrigen. He was a success story. His system worked. The numbers proved it. 1981. The old Miller farm next to his came up for sale. The Miller son didn't want to farm. He wanted to move to the city. It was 40 acres of good bottomland. The bank offered it to Arthur. With a loan. He said no. He went to the son directly. He offered him $20,000, everything he had saved. He bought the 40 acres, cash. He now farmed 200 acres, no debt. 1982. He got 130 bushels an acre. He was learning the soil, learning the moods of his grandfather's seed. He was selecting his own seed now, just like Silas, saving kernels from the strongest plants, the ones that stood up to the wind. 1983. A small drought. The neighbors had to irrigate, running up their electric bills. Arthur's corn held on. The leaves curled during the day, but they were green in the morning. The deep roots were working. His yield was down to 100 bushels, but his profit was still $80 an acre. His neighbors broke even. Some lost money. 1984. He bought another 80 acres, land that had been foreclosed on. The farmer had been a big Agrigen customer. He'd chased the big yields, taken on too much debt, and the drought of '83 broke him. Arthur bought his farm at auction. He paid for it with cash. He now farmed 280 acres. He was a quiet man. He didn't talk about his success at the co-op. He just worked. He fixed his own equipment. He kept his grandfather's journal on the kitchen table. He read it every night. The dirt knows. The seed remembers. 1985, 1986, 1987. More of the same. Slow, steady growth. He bought another 100 acres. Cash. By 1988, Arthur Hayes was farming nearly 400 acres. He had no debt. He owned his land. He owned his equipment. He owned his seed. He was, in the truest sense of the word, free. But nobody saw it that way. They just saw the messy fields, the old equipment, the lower yields. They saw a man stuck in the past. Frank Miller, now a vice president at Agrogen, would sometimes hear about Arthur. He'd feel that same twinge of pity. The poor guy, still scratching a living out of the dirt, still clinging to that old red corn. If only he had listened, he could have been so much more. Certainty. It's a powerful thing. The certainty that you know what's best for someone else. That your way is the only way forward. That progress only moves in one direction. Frank Miller was certain. The entire agricultural industry was certain. And in the summer of 1988, that certainty was about to be shattered. It started in the South. A new strain of corn blight, northern cornleaf blight, race 2. It was aggressive, it was virulent, and the fungicides they used on the Silver Spire hybrids, they didn't touch it. It spread on the wind, spores traveling hundreds of miles on the summer breezes. By July, it was in Arthur's County. It started as small gray lesions on the lower leaves. Within a week, the lesions were the size of a dollar bill. Within 2 weeks, entire fields were turning a sickly grayish brown, as if a fire had swept through them. The perfect uniform rows of Silver Spire 720, the genetic monoculture that had promised such high yields. It was that very uniformity that made it so vulnerable. When one plant got sick, they all got sick. There was no genetic diversity, no firewall. Panic set in. Farmers were spraying everything they could. Nothing worked. The co-op was a place of hushed, desperate conversations. The bank managers started making calls. Dave Peterson, Arthur's neighbor, stood at the edge of his field. 300 acres of dying corn. He was looking at total ruin. He looked across the fence line, at Arthur Hayes's farm, and what he saw didn't make sense. Arthur's field wasn't perfect. It was a patchwork. There were sick plants, stalks with gray lesions, maybe 1 in 10. But all around them, the other plants were fine. They were green. They were healthy. The tassels were full of pollen. The silks were emerging on the young ears. The Hayes red dent, the seed that was a relic, the seed with 100 seasons of survival in its DNA. It had seen blights before. It had seen rusts and smuts and droughts. Over 50 years, Silas Hayes had unknowingly selected for genetic diversity. He had built a silent, invisible resilience into every kernel. He hadn't bred a perfect plant. He had bred a tough population, a community of plants that knew how to survive. The blight came into Arthur's field, and it hit a wall of 1,000 different genetic responses. It couldn't spread. It was contained. The dead weight. It was the only thing left standing. Years later, Frank Miller sat in his university office. He hung up the phone with Dr. Thorne. Arthur Hayes. The name echoed in his memory. He pulled up the file she had mentioned. He saw the numbers. 94% survival. He felt a cold knot in his stomach. a feeling he hadn't had in years, the feeling of being wrong, profoundly, fundamentally wrong. He was a good man. He had spent his life trying to help farmers. He had based his entire career on a set of facts, and those facts had just crumbled to dust. He drove out of the city that afternoon. He drove on highways that had once been country roads, past housing developments that had once been farms. He found the turnoff to Arthur's place. The lane was still gravel. The farmhouse was the same, but with a new coat of white paint. The barn roof was solid. There were new grain bins gleaming in the sun. A new, large machine shed. The farm was not just surviving, it was thriving. He saw a man near the barn, older now. His hair was gray, but he moved with the same steady purpose. It was Arthur. He was working a seed cleaner, an old, restored wooden one. The red kernels of his corn flowed down a chute into a clean canvas sack. Arthur saw the car. He saw Frank get out. He didn't smile, he didn't scowl. He just watched him approach. He turned off the machine. The sudden silence was heavy. Frank stopped a few feet away. He looked older too, tired. The certainty was gone from his eyes, replaced by something quieter. He searched for the right words. There weren't any. "I saw a report," Frank said, his voice raspy, "about the blight in '88, about your corn." Arthur just nodded. He waited. Frank took a breath. "How did you know?" Arthur looked at the seed cleaner, at the red kernels that were his life's work, and his father's, and his grandfather's. He finally looked at Frank. His voice was quiet, not triumphant, not angry, just tired. Tired from a fight Frank never even knew was happening. "I didn't know," Arthur said. "My grandfather did. He spent his life listening to the land. He taught the seed how to remember." Frank just stood there. The silence stretched on. Arthur spoke again. "You told me his work was dead weight. You said it with such kindness. That was the hard part. You thought you were helping me, proving someone wrong who thinks they're being kind. It's the loneliest fight there is." He paused, then delivered the final, quiet blow. "Turns out his work wasn't dead weight, Frank. Turns out it was the only thing with any weight at all." Frank Miller didn't say another word. He just nodded, turned around, got back in his car, and drove away. It wasn't an apology. It was a surrender. A quiet devastation. The witness who had watched from a distance for so long had finally seen the truth. And the truth was that he had been the one who was stuck in the past. A past where a single solution could fix everything. But that's not the end of the story, because a legacy is not what you keep for yourself. It's what you give away. After the blight of '88, Arthur Hayes became a quiet legend. His neighbors, their fields barren, their credit gone. They came to him, hats in their hands, their pride broken. They asked if they could buy some of his seed for the next year. Arthur looked at them. The same men who had whispered about him at the co-op. The same men who had called him a fool. He could have said no. He could have named his price. He had them all at his mercy. He did neither. He said, "It's not for sale, but I'll give you enough to plant 100 acres each, on one condition. You save your own seed from now on, and if another neighbor ever needs help, you give them some of yours." He didn't save a dozen farms. He taught a dozen farms how to save themselves. He taught them that self-sufficiency was the ultimate form of freedom. The university came calling. Dr. Thorne, the young geneticist, came to the farm. She wasn't slick like Frank Miller. She was curious. She was humble. She spent a week with Arthur. She walked his fields. She looked at his grandfather's journal. She took samples of the haze red dent. Back in her lab, she mapped its genome. She found what she called a library of resilience, a vast, untapped reservoir of genetic diversity. The university offered to buy the rights to the seed. Arthur said no. Instead, he proposed a partnership. He would provide the seed. They would provide the science. Together, they created the Silas Hayes Seed Bank, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving heirloom grains. Farmers from all over the state sent in their old seeds, seeds their grandfathers had grown, seeds they had been told were worthless. The bank preserved them, cataloged them, and made them available to anyone, for free. The Hayes red dent became the genetic backbone for a whole new generation of modern hybrids. Hybrids that were truly blight resistant. Hybrids that didn't need a flood of chemicals to survive. Agrogen, the company Frank Miller worked for, eventually licensed the genetics from the University Foundation. They paid millions, money that went right back into funding the seed bank. Arthur never saw a dime of it. He didn't want it. He kept farming his land. He lived in the same house. He drove the same old pickup truck. His wealth wasn't in his bank account. It was in his barn, in the canvas sacks full of dark red kernels. It was in his freedom. Freedom from debt, freedom from dependency, freedom from having to ask for permission. Today, if you go to the state's Agricultural History Museum, there's an exhibit on the Great Blight of '88. In a glass case, there's a single stalk of corn, a haze red dent. Its leaves are broad and green. Its tassel is thick. Its roots, preserved in a block of clear resin, are a dense, tangled mass, deep and powerful. Next to it is a small, leather-bound book, opened to a specific page. The handwriting is elegant. The ink is faded. It reads, "The dirt knows. The seed remembers. Don't let them forget." That journal is the physical artifact, the bridge between then and now. Sometimes, a young woman brings her daughter to the museum. The woman is a farmer. She farms 400 acres of land. She is Arthur Hayes's granddaughter. She points to the journal. She tells her daughter the story of her great-great-grandfather Silas and her grandfather Arthur, the story of the quiet men who listened to the dirt. The little girl reaches out. She places her small hand on the cool glass of the case. Her fingers trace the shape of the faded words. The legacy is secure. It is being passed on. The seed remembers. And now, so do we. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is being told they can't. Someone is being told their idea is obsolete, that their way is old-fashioned, that their contribution is dead weight. And the person telling them this isn't a villain. They are kind. They are reasonable. They are certain. They believe they are protecting them. The most dangerous limitation is the one imposed by someone who genuinely believes they are helping. It cannot be fought with anger. It can only be disproven, with decades of quiet work, with a stubborn belief in the wisdom you hold in your own hands, with the courage to stand alone. If this story reminded you of someone, if it made you think of a time you were underestimated, or a time you almost gave up on something you believed in, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories of quiet perseverance, and leave a comment below. Tell us about the dead weight you refused to let go of, because sometimes the things they tell us to forget are the only things worth holding on to.